Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto left Konoha and traveled the world. 4 years after the war's end, Kakashi assigns Naruto a long mission with the promise of becoming the next Hokage at its completion. Naruto sets out on his mission that may take years and participates in many adventures along the way. During his travels, he unexpectedly encounters a beautiful, pink-eyed woman from his past. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 1, Greetings and Goodbyes. Naruto felt the warmth of the sun on his face as he admired the mesmerizing shades of green before him. The lush trees danced gracefully with the soft breeze blowing in from the south. The crystal sky extended far into the distance, rimmed with a black outline. He observed the ominous, dark shadows in the horizon that told of rain and fateful findings. He was close, he thought. He would probably reach his destination by tomorrow evening, and then he would once again enjoy the comforts of civilization. Naruto stretched his arms to relieve the tense and tired muscles that were results from long travel. After his stretch, Naruto slowly continued his trek along the dirt path he had been following for well over a month now, his thoughts focusing on the events that had transpired in his village over a month ago. He recalled stepping into the Hokage office that eventful morning when Kakashi had summoned him. The Rokudaime Hokage had seemed to be exhausted then. Throughout the majority of that conversation, Naruto remembered wondering if he was going to be that tired when his time came. "I have a mission for you," he announced as soon as Naruto had approached his desk. "Huh? Wha? It will be considered S-class, but not because of difficulty. More due to how long it will take you." He shifted some papers and waited for the blonde's response. Normally, Naruto would have been ecstatic at the prospect of the word S-class, but at the time he was quite taken aback by the brevity of his situation. Kakashi-sensei, this is a little sudden, yeah?" The dull glimmer in his mentor's eyes that day still left Naruto reeling. "Do you not think you're capable of such a mission?" "Well, no. But you haven't even explained." "You'll be traveling across the nations," Kakashi added with no semblance of concern for cutting the young man off. "It's about time for you to get ready to become Hokage. I certainly can't train you myself, so might as well let the world do it for the both of us." Naruto didn't have time to dwell on the fact that Kakashi had basically promised him the title right then and there. "Do I really have to go that far?" Kakashi looked up from his papers. "Are you underestimating the weight that comes with the position?" "No, of course not, but..." "Good, then there's no issue. Because as you understand, you were probably strong enough to become Hokage 4 years ago, but strength isn't the only indicator." "I never said," Naruto started. Even looking back, the blonde still felt irritated at his old teacher's interruptions. "You're inexperienced, Naruto. And young, very young. Your father was even older when he put on the hat, so this is going to be a long mission indeed." Naruto frowned and folded his arms. "Where exactly will I go?" Kakashi leaned into his chair. "The destination doesn't matter. Everyone will recognize you, anyways. You'll be welcomed anywhere. You just need to be open to what the world has to show you." "Okay. But you still haven't told me why." "It doesn't matter why, Naruto. I'm sure you'll figure it out yourself once the mission is complete." His eyes locked onto his former student. "And I do expect you to complete it." Apprehension and annoyance was not a good combination, and Naruto recalled both at that moment. "This still sounds really vague." "Hopefully, that will be the least of your problems," Kakashi added as he turned back to his papers. "You have much to learn, and I'm sure everything will sort itself out. It's not like another war will break out anytime soon." "And what happens when I complete it?" "If the mission is successful, then you become Hokage," said Kakashi. Suddenly, all the apprehension in him disappeared. "Wait, really? Just like that?" "Of course." Kakashi returned all his attention back to him. "That's why I hope you understand the importance of this mission. Now then, when can you be ready?" The excitement in him was too much then. He wanted to start immediately. The irony of time being the ultimate obstacle to his goal was lost to him, and his impulses were taking over. "Today." "No, wait, I'll need to pack up and say goodbye to everybody first, tomorrow. Kakashi chuckled. Naruto didn't realize how much he was going to miss that sound. I think you can spare a few more days, yes? For the sake of the whole village, I think they'll need some time to cope with your departure. Go on and prepare, you got all the time in the world. Naruto ran out of the office shortly after Kakashi had said that, an eager grin plastered on his face. Unbeknownst to the war hero, the Hokage kept the main reason for the mission to himself for now. He would tell him when he was ready. The more Naruto thought about leaving as the day of his departure came closer, the more he became restless about actually leaving the village. He became detached from the village in many ways in recent years. He hadn't felt a challenge in years, and while he enjoyed not having to worry about his loved ones getting hurt, he felt hollow. Naruto wanted to have adventures again. He was a young man, full of potential and energy, and until he became the Hokage, he did not really see a reason to be in the village. Naruto greatly admired all his friends and felt physical pain when he knew he could do nothing for them, but they would be fine even if he left them for a while. He would find something during his adventures that would give him cause to feel a part of the life he wanted, he was sure of it. The night before Naruto was to leave the village, he went to speak with his longtime friend, Sakura. Sasuke still had not returned even once since he had left to investigate the origins and knowledge about Kaguya, leaving the smitten, pink-haired Kunoichi all alone. Naruto had given up his pursuit of trying to win her affections for him some time ago. It was not an easy decision for him to have made, but he knew it was crucial for him to protect his heart. The young woman loved his best friend with all her heart, and he had concluded the sooner he realized that the easier the transition would be for him. Naruto found Sakura standing over her balcony that night, staring thoughtfully at the village lights below her. Naruto silently jumped up to the balcony where she was located and sat on the ledge next to her looking over the village. Sakura gazed at him from the corner of her eye and smiled softly. Naruto didn't like the sorrow behind that smile. It was a sliver of melancholy thrust into the porcelain he had known so intimately. It made him feel powerless, as if nothing he could do would aid it. I'm guessing this means you're leaving soon? She asked. Naruto looked down at the artificial lights that almost mirrored the stars shining above in the dark sky. He sighed slowly. His breath was low, and his words flowed into the open air. Yeah. Tomorrow morning. Sakura nodded and rested her head on the ledge in front of her. She had to say farewell to another person close to her, and he was aware that must have been terrible for her. Naruto knew he was taking the mission to help himself, but he secretly hoped he would come across Sasuke during his travels. If he did, he promised himself he would tell his friend to go back to Sakura. The girl had been waiting 4 years for her love already, and she couldn't wait much longer. Naruto had tried to be there for her as much as possible, but often he felt he was simply distracting her from it all. She deserved better. Naruto's own love life after the war had been virtually non-existent. There were many women who were captivated by the handsome blonde, but he had always politely refused their advances. At first, he had been completely clueless to all of them, considering his old habits, but he had grown substantially in the last couple years and had learned how to handle their affections appropriately. Somehow, this seemed to only increase the drive of the women's resolve and turned into almost a competition to see who would win over the war hero first. Hinata Hyuga had gotten closer than anyone else and had managed to score a few dates with the powerful fighter. She had eventually confessed her feelings to him, but in the end, her love was left unrequited. The reason for Naruto's refusals were not because of prudish intentions. At first, it was because of Sakura and his feelings for her, but eventually it was his uncertainty towards love that affected him. He hadn't met a woman yet that could entice him or make him want to pursue after her. Whenever he was asked to explain what he meant, he found it to be rather difficult. His usual response would be, "I just haven't found the right person yet." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either because it wasn't the most accurate description of what he actually felt. Naruto was pulled from his pensive thoughts when he heard Sakura sobbing next to him. His eyes widened with surprise at seeing her in such a broken state. It was at times like this Naruto felt like he didn't really know Sakura at all. She always seemed so distant and lost to him, as if his words would only be meant with emptiness. Naruto had concluded he just was not the man to do it. It had saddened him to decide that, but he knew it was for the best. Despite all of this, Naruto put his arm around her, and she quickly embraced him. They had each other in that moment, and that felt like it was enough. When Sakura had stopped crying, she had looked up at him with ruddy, tired eyes. "Come back soon, okay?" Her whispers were dull and muffled under the pale stars. Naruto smiled softly and brushed a hand against her tear-stained face gently. "Okay," he whispered back. Naruto left a few minutes after that. That was the last time he had seen her. The next day, Naruto said goodbye to everyone else. Every single person in Konoha had gathered at the village gates to express their gratitude for their hero and share their farewells to him. They showered him with gifts and praise as he passed all of them to reach the gate that day. Young women cried, and the men shouted with pride at knowing him. If there had been anything that would have given him pause to wonder if he should have left, it was the sight of all his friends in the state of reluctance. They all stood there next to the village gate with mixed expressions. Shikamaru tried to act cool and disinterested about his leaving, but Naruto knew he was having a difficult time. Rock Lee was bawling uncontrollably that day until Naruto told him he would be much stronger when he returned, which had caused the taijutsu master to become overly driven for the next year or so. Ino gave her regards to Naruto and didn't seem to be particularly bothered about his leaving, at least outwardly. Sai was strangely anxious about Naruto's journey, but with a few kind words from the young hero, he appeared to be in a better mood. Choji gave Naruto a pat on the back and told him to come back stronger than ever. Tenten said to make Neji proud and to remember who his friends were. Kiba gave him a thumbs up and mentioned he would relinquish the title of Hokage to Naruto when he returned. Naruto grinned at that gesture from his friend. Yamato presented the basic pleasantries and fist-bumped Naruto. Konohamaru said he would be far stronger when Naruto returned and wanted to spar as soon as he got back. When the awkward moment came to speak to Hinata, Naruto had brushed aside his negative feelings and wished her well. The gentle Hinata accepted his friendly words and bowed respectfully to her former love. Tsunade, on the other hand, was a lot less subtle. She almost squeezed the life out of Naruto and begged him not to leave. Kakashi pried her off of him, and even then, she was still noticeably upset. Kakashi provided Naruto with a map of the surrounding nations and where he recommended he should go first. Amegakure had been quiet as of late. They hadn't heard from the shinobi in that area for quite some time, and he wanted Naruto to investigate the problem if there was one. He told Naruto that he had notified all of the other Kage about his mission, and that they would greatly welcome his company whenever he arrived. He handed Naruto a small scroll that stated his mission and approval to enter any allied nation and the surrounding nations with the Hokage's official signature. The Hokage ordered Naruto to send a report as often as possible during his mission via a messenger toad. Remember, Kakashi reminded him before he left, there's no rush. Take your time with this. You can truly come back whenever you want, however, I expect you to be ready to be Hokage if you do. For the entirety of his journey, Naruto never forgot the staidness behind his master's words nor the intensity in his sable eyes. If you come back and you're not ready, you can forget about becoming Hokage. Naruto swallowed and felt his resolve burning. You got it, Kakashi-sensei. I'll be ready. Naruto remembered that day being sunny and bright, a perfect day to travel. Garbed in black traveling clothes and a brown hooded traveling cloak, Naruto took his first step past the village gate. Naruto strapped his large satchel around his shoulder. It was filled with money, rations, clothes, scrolls, and other necessary items. He waved to his friends when he began his peregrination, and the whole village had waved back and shouted their farewells to the hero until his figure disappeared beyond the western horizon. That had been 40 days ago, Naruto realized with cold discernment. He decided to take Kakashi's advice and took his time in reaching Amegakure. For an average shinobi that went max speed, they could reach Ame from Konoha within 3 days. For Naruto, with the help of Kurama, he could probably reach the village in a few hours. Obviously, Naruto didn't want to move that fast, so he maintained a slow and steady pace every day. He would walk for about 8 hours a day, then find a cozy meadow or tree to rest for the night. He passed the occasional inn or village every now and then, and he would usually stay there for a few days. Sometimes, if the village was particularly comfortable or friendly, he would stay for a number of days until he felt it was best to move on. Needless to say, every village was sad to see him leave. Naruto was currently close to the western border of Hinokuni, and the country where Ame was located was near. Naruto could feel the density around him, and the humidity increased every step he took. He could feel his bandaged right prosthetic tighten slightly, something that usually occurred right before it rained. The rain clouds that had originally seemed so far away before, were now almost directly over him. Naruto pulled up his hood and smiled as it started to sprinkle on him. He had learned to appreciate the rain in recent years, especially because it reminded him of Nagato. Even though Naruto had his hood up, some raindrops fell upon his face, clear, delicate beads dripped from his long bangs. He allowed his spiky, blonde hair grow out recently, and it was now slightly longer than his father's had been. He had also grown substantially in height and physique. He maintained a lean yet muscular frame that had earned more than a few stares from the opposite gender. The sun had left his vision about an hour ago, and the night was quickly approaching. The rain became a downpour within minutes, and Naruto scanned the area for some place to spend the night. It was early summer, so the rain wasn't freezing, but Naruto surmised he didn't want to be soaked to the bone all night. He found a large, hollowed-out tree that was still dry on the inside off the side of the dirt path. He crouched down and huddled his body into it. The dead tree was warm and pleasant, and the blonde had no trouble sleeping that night. Naruto drifted off to the sound of millions of raindrops bouncing against the leaves of the forest around him, and he couldn't conceive of a more peaceful melody to fall asleep to. Amegakure was usually poorly categorized as a village, but the truth was it was more like a city than a small town. Konoha was far bigger, but it didn't contain the large metal buildings that Ame proudly possessed. It almost always rained in Ame, and all the water converged into the massive lake surrounding the village. The lake was the village's means of protection and provided a sense of isolation as well. Travelers and merchants wishing to reach Ame would usually take a ferry or boat to get across. In the past, travelers would have to go through a plethora of screenings and questions to visit the village, but nowadays it was much more lenient. There was a small docking facility on the outskirts of the lake that welcomed, screened, and shipped newcomers to Ame. In the early morning hours, a hooded figure approached the customs building, and the shinobi on duty greeted him in a bored tone. "Welcome to customs," the Aimnin announced with disinterest. The hooded man unveiled himself and smiled at the ninja. Naruto's grin was broad, and his electric blue eyes sparkled brilliantly in the morning rain. Naruto may have mellowed out excessively over the last couple of years, but he was still his cheery, positive self. "Hello. I would like to visit Ame if that's all right." The Aimnin's eyes practically bugged out at seeing Naruto's face. Naruto shouldn't have been surprised, but he did help save the entire world and all of humanity, so it was easy for him to see why he was recognized so quickly all the time. The Aimnin started stumbling over his words as he tried to address Naruto. "Uzumaki-san. Of course, you may be allowed to visit." The ninja was unsure of where to put his hands all of a sudden and settled with saluting Naruto. Naruto gave him a curious expression but flashed him another smile. "Great. I'll be going then." Naruto's voice rang merrily as he strolled towards the surface of the lake. The shinobi peeked his head out the window with surprise. "Where are you going?" "The dock is that way," the Aimnin yelled as he pointed to the right of where Naruto was heading. Naruto just waved and hollered back. "It's fine. I don't need a boat. I can walk." The shinobi just stared in marveled awe as he saw Naruto casually cruise on top of the water. Ninja had done it before, of course, but the way the hero carried himself provoked a sense of respect. The Aimnin slowly came to realize he may have met the strongest shinobi in the entire world and he didn't even go through the proper security checks with the hero. He should probably notify his officers about the meeting he just had, he thought to himself as he ran off in search of his captain. Naruto didn't really recognize the fact he was walking on water when he did it. It had become second nature to him years ago and was as simple as walking on land. He could easily skate across the water if he wanted to, but again, no rush. He loved taking his time now. After living most of his life always hurrying and never stopping to ponder, Naruto had learned to savor every precious moment he was given. Naruto ventured farther out, and when he was about halfway across the lake, a high-ranking Aimnin slowly emerged from the murky liquid below. The war hero didn't falter at the sight of the random shinobi because he had sensed his presence ever since the ninja had plunged into the lake several minutes ago. He didn't detect any danger nor ill intent from the officer, so there was no need to be on guard. When the officer broke the surface in front of him, Naruto bowed respectfully to the man. The mental voice of Sakura's ravings about his lack of etiquette was a great reminder to keep his manners in check. "Good morning," Naruto stated cheerfully. Over the last few years or so, Shikamaru had been helping Naruto with observing people's habits and subtle consistencies to get a read on their mental condition. He had followed his friend around the village and learned from facial expressions of people and how they carried themselves. Shikamaru told him that most individuals, including shinobi, gave away much more information through their body language, tone of voice, eye contact, hand movements, and posture than they ever did through their words. The officer currently in front of him was stoic and slightly on edge. Naruto could tell the shinobi was confused and apprehensive about him being there. His face was stern and gave away nothing, but there was another feeling the officer was showcasing through the soft convulsions of his hand's fear. Naruto smiled as wide as possible, so he didn't increase the man's fright. He knew his smile was excellent at setting people at ease. It seemed to work because the shaking halted when the officer spoke back. "Good morning, please state your name and business." The officer had a matter-of-fact tone with no faltering in his words. He clearly already knew his name, but Naruto decided to play along. "Naruto Uzumaki," he stated. "I am presently on a mission by the Rokudaime Hokage. Please, read this." Naruto pulled the scroll Kakashi had given to him from an inside pocket in his cloak. The officer calmly grasped the scroll and quickly scanned its contents. When he finished reading it, the Aimnin handed it back to Naruto and cleared his throat. "Everything seems to be in order." The officer bowed. "We are honored to welcome the hero of the Fourth Shinobi World War, Naruto Uzumaki, to our peaceful village. Please, stay as long as you like." Naruto bowed back again and rubbed the back of his neck modestly when he stood upright. "Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I have a quick question to ask before you." Naruto wasn't sure if he liked the slight emphasis in the officer's voice when he had said peaceful. "Of course." The officer appeared to be at ease, but there was a rigidness about him that spoke of darker secrets. Naruto tried to make the matter seem minor to his interests. "Is everything well in your village? Konoha hasn't been receiving updates or reports from Ame in quite some time." Naruto's suspicions became definite when the man rolled gently back on his heels at the question. It was subtle, but it didn't escape his eye. The officer was nervous at answering him, Naruto was certain of that. "Everything is superb, Uzumaki-san." Naruto noticed the gentle twitch of the man's hands at his subtle lie. "This guy has really got to control his hands," Naruto thought to himself. "It has been so serene and quiet here that we have had no need to report anything, whatsoever. I hope that is a formidable excuse, Uzumaki-san. If you would like, I will personally start writing a monthly update to Konoha. However, it will most assuredly be filled with uneventful instances and dull resource lists." Naruto nodded and accepted the man's falsehood. He would need to investigate what was really going on himself. That was fine. He liked that more, anyways. He thanked the man and meandered around him with calm grace. As Naruto was walking away, the officer said one last thing, "I hope you run into the other future Kage that is staying with us, too." Naruto paused for a second at the cryptic statement but then continued his sojourn towards Ame in silence. For the rest of the way across the lake, Naruto contemplated the officer's words. Another future Kage? Did that mean there was a shinobi from one of the other nations on a similar mission as him? Naruto would have to find out. His thoughts stopped when he was a few yards from the end of the lake. Naruto looked down at the ripples forming around his feet. His master and godfather, Jiraiya, had fallen in this lake. That was what Fukazaku, the elder toad sage, had told him. Naruto still greatly missed his old master and smiled sadly down at the place where Jiraiya had been slain. He stopped to give a quick prayer on his behalf before he stepped out of the water and onto dry land. Naruto had never visited Amegakure before and was utterly astounded by the giant skyscrapers that towered above him. He attempted to keep to the shadows as much as possible to not draw any more attention to his recognizable features. Blonde hair would easily contrast with the stormy, dark colors of the city, so he kept his hood up. He could have performed a henge, but Naruto didn't want to alert any of the higher-level shinobi in the area. Naruto carefully inspected all his surroundings and tried to assess the area as thoroughly as possible. The citizens he encountered seemed to be cheerful and calm for the most part. Shop owners yelled and joked off the side of the streets, and the village bustled merrily. Aside from the constant rain, it felt like any other village. He would need to stay here for a while longer to find the source of the anxiety the officer had possessed during Naruto's questioning. After an hour of traversing through the village, Naruto noticed a small restaurant at the corner of one of the larger buildings. He decided on satiating his growing hunger and taking a much-needed break. Naruto stepped into the bar and dropped his hood. Luckily, there was hardly anyone attendant in the little restaurant this morning. Naruto observed a few strangers eating a late breakfast and a lone hooded figure sitting at the bar counter. Naruto casually sat down at the bar, next to the hooded patron, and relaxed his tired leg muscles as he beckoned over a server. The server came over and took his order. Naruto asked for some tea and a steaming bowl of ramen. It had been much too long since he had enjoyed his favorite dish. He was beyond ecstatic when he saw that it was a choice on their front menu. After the server wrote down his order and departed, Naruto looked to his left and observed the stranger next to him. He realized they were drinking some sake out of a small cup and widened his eyes marginally in disbelief. "A little early for alcohol, isn't it?" Naruto inquired with a sardonic tone. The hooded figure must have noticed him for the first time because they shifted slightly and mumbled something. The light pitch of their voice told Naruto that it was a young woman underneath the cowl. "Not if you can handle it," she retorted. The woman's chide carried a hint of aggression, but it was mostly comprised of effrontery. At that moment, the woman unveiled her hood and gazed up at Naruto with a playful glint in her eye. The glint quickly disappeared once pure surprise replaced it. Her mouth gaped open and her pink, pupil-less eyes widened greatly. "Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto looked at her quizzically. There was only person he had met in his past that had those mesmerizing eyes. She had grown her hair out since the last time he had seen her, and her Iwa headband had been discarded. "Kurotsuchi." Naruto blinked in hesitation then smiled brightly. "Wow. It's been a while, huh?" Kurotsuchi closed her mouth and felt her face get hot in embarrassment. She was talking to the hero of the Fourth Shinobi World War and had lost her well-known composure for a second. She was also amazed by how much Naruto had grown in the last 4 years. His face was more pronounced and masculine. The rest of his body had filled in as well, and he was nothing short of a strong, handsome man now. Kurotsuchi took a deep breath and tried to collect herself. She was not going to lose her pride by speaking to a pretty face, but she still wanted to have a little fun. "It certainly has, Uzumaki. And why have I been blessed with your presence in Ame, this morning?" she asked calmly. Naruto was unsure as to why, but he found the small smirk on Kurotsuchi's mouth to be quite delightful. He fastened his cerulean eyes to hers and attempted to mirror her expression. "I just happened to be passing by. And I believe I'm the one who has been truly blessed this lovely morning, young lady." Naruto was thoroughly enjoying himself, and he could tell Kurotsuchi was too. They were fighting a battle of wits, trying to obtain information that neither were willing to give up easily. It was a shinobi thing. She didn't waver at his charm. "We're rather far from Konoha, aren't we? It's a little odd to see someone of your status skulking about." She kept her voice loose with a ring of ardor laced within. "Yeah, it's odd, but I wouldn't call it skulking. I prefer checking out. Also, if I recall correctly, Iwa is only a few days away, too." Kurotsuchi narrowed her eyes slightly but kept the smirk. Their nations were allies, and she knew there was no reason to be so cautious, but she was enamored by the wit of the man before her. If her memory was accurate, she was certain it was a recent development for him. She brought her hand up to her face and rested it on the side of her cheek, showing off her freshly polished fingernails. "For a man that should have passed the Hokage, I wonder as to why you have left your village, hero." She kept a precise flair to her inflection that she was rather proud of. Naruto couldn't help but grin at that subtle jab she gave. He decided to be a bit more direct in his approach. Fishing for information was turning out to be much more enjoyable this time around for him. "Funny you should say that, considering you should be the Chuchikage by now." He was hoping that would break her mask, but it didn't. Kurotsuchi's smirk merely got bigger. Kurotsuchi didn't expect him to come back with a stronger retort. She wasn't sure if she should give him something to play with or to be more ambiguous. She settled on adding more to the conversation. It just so happens that I'm on an S-ranked mission, hero. My grandfather is going to give me the title of the Yondaimetsu Chikage when I return. She was startled when Naruto's smile vanished, and his eyebrows rose in awe. This peculiar man was demonstrating a formidable range of emotions, and Kurotsuchi was uncertain as to what she felt about that. She certainly didn't anticipate him to be that surprised. Naruto had never participated in such playful banter before and was amazed at his own words, but now he was even more astounded. The sheer coincidence was baffling. That's remarkable, Kurotsuchi. Kakashi assigned me the same mission. Naruto dropped his intentional charm and possessed nothing but pure amazement on his features. Kurotsuchi's facade seemed to fall as well at his proclamation. She blinked and remained silent for a few seconds. After the pause, she smirked again. Let me guess, the Hokage wanted you to investigate Amegakure's silence, too. Naruto caught on and grinned cheerfully. Yes. I take it they haven't reported to Iwa either? He asked, already knowing the answer. They haven't. Her smirk was small, but it held such a heavy amount of pulchritude to it that Naruto was having difficulty focusing on his words. I see. You don't happen to have any leads. Naruto's eyes were not so distracted to neglect the fact that the server had just placed his order of ramen in front of him. Kurotsuchi stood up out of her chair and flashed another playful smile at him. Naruto would be lying if he said he didn't appreciate the sparkle in her rosy eyes. I don't believe I do, I'm afraid. Now, if you'll excuse me. She turned to leave. Naruto wanted to follow her. He told himself that such reasoning was because he wanted to know more about Aim's predicament. However, he was horrible at convincing himself of anything other than the truth. Instead, rather than part with his delectable ramen, he tried to appeal to her. Perhaps, you'd like to accompany me for a casual date, then. Kurotsuchi's eyes flashed innocence as she tilted her head at him. Why, I thought we were already on one. The smile she gave him should have melted his bones away. It would have if she had made use of her lava release. At that point, he would have welcomed such a reaction. Maybe next time you'll be more aware of that fact. Goodbye, hero. With that, she was gone. Naruto looked back at the spot where she had departed and couldn't seem to wipe the large grin off his face. He ate his anticipated meal in silence and then asked the server where the nearest inn was. As Naruto was crossing the drowned street towards the small inn a few minutes later, he reflected on the gorgeous woman he just encountered as the heavy rain fell upon his strong frame. Naruto rarely talked like that, and it was slightly unsettling how he acted towards the Iwaku no Ichi. He was not ashamed of his words, but he was wary of them. Naruto remembered Kurotsuchi had appeared to look like a boy with her hair and figure 4 years ago, but today she was very much a woman in his eyes. Her features had filled in, and Naruto recalled she was wearing red nail polish. Her beyond shoulder-length haircut and her laughing, salmon-colored eyes enthralled the young blonde. He liked the way she smirked and exchanged verbal swordplay with him. He wanted to speak with her more. During the war, he had seen her fight and knew a few basic details about her, but he knew even her grandfather better than her, and that fact perturbed him. With these thoughts in mind, Naruto barely recalled walking up to the innkeeper, paying for a room, and climbing up the stairs to reach his temporary lodging. He finally noticed he was standing in front of his room and swayed his head to shake away his daze. He stepped into his room and closed the door. The accommodation was furnished with a small coffee table, a hardwood desk and chair, a twin-size bed, a small restroom, and a dresser. Naruto shook his somewhat damp hair and fished a scroll from his satchel before dropping it to the ground gently. He threw his cloak aside and sat down at the hardwood desk. Naruto opened the scroll, which was blank, and began writing a message to Kakashi. The scroll gave a general report of the last few days and spoke of small details concerning mundane yet meaningful events. In the last paragraph, Naruto mentioned his suspicions concerning Aim's status and how he would continue his investigations promptly. He also added the confrontation with Kurotsuchi and asked if the Hokage had known any information about her peculiar mission. He signed the scroll at the bottom and summoned a messenger toad to bring the message to Kakashi. After the toad vanished in a poof of white smoke, Naruto leaned back in his chair and pondered more about the beautiful, young woman he had confronted that day. It was still midday, but Naruto felt surprisingly fatigued already. He rested his eyes for a moment and decided he would not mind seeing a certain pair of soft, pink eyes again in the near future. Chapter 2, To Step Forward. The rain battered against the glass of the window, and the dissonant noise disturbed the tranquil quality of the quiet room. Naruto awoke to the sound of the rain, and he recalled falling asleep to it as well. It certainly does rain a lot around here, he thought as he took his bearings. Sometime during the night, Naruto must have fallen onto his bed because he was currently sprawled upon it, still garbed in his travel clothes. He sat up and examined the window next to his bed. It was colored silver by the fresh raindrops and was slightly paled by the late morning light. He was fairly certain he had slept for a whole 24 hours. He didn't know he had been so tired and chuckled inwardly at himself. After Naruto showered and was fully dressed, he went to the innkeeper at the front desk and paid to stay for a few extra days. The innkeeper looked up at him suspiciously. She was a frail, old woman who seemed to be rather prudent in her methods. "You look oddly familiar, young man," she said as she peered up at him over her cloudy eyeglasses. Naruto rubbed the nape of his neck and smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Naruto lifted his hood up and covered his head to conceal himself from anyone else who might find him familiar. As he shuffled through the flooded streets, he pondered what should be the next step in his investigation. He needed to find some more intel about what was happening in Ame. He surmised he would most likely be not receiving any additional information from any of the high-leveled shinobi in the village concerning the events of yesterday morning. Perhaps, he would have better luck with someone of a lower rank. Fortunately for him, he found his target a few minutes later, a lanky genin traversing through the streets alone. The genin seemed to have a lackadaisical attitude about him as he swung his arms about in a careless motion. Naruto trotted behind him, allowing his steps to be a little too loud in hope of the genin taking notice of him. The genin turned around and looked with conjecture at the blonde. As he got within an arm's reach of the lad, Naruto noticed the orange sash around the boy's left arm. Naruto's grin was massive and genuine at seeing his favorite color. He had changed his wardrobe to black to ensure his mission's security, but he had missed his old clothes greatly. He promised himself if he found a suitable article of clothing that was orange during his journey, he certainly wouldn't neglect the chance. "Good morning." The genin seemed to be slightly nervous at speaking to the tall blonde man in front of him, but he didn't seem to recognize who he was. Naruto had discarded his headband and left it back in Konoha, so unless a person recognized him outrightly, they would be unable to affiliate him with his village. Nevertheless, his strong features and impressive physique tended to intimidate people. The genin was no exception. "Good morning, citizen." The boy's greeting was laced with anxiety. Naruto tried his best to be polite, but he didn't want to dance around his investigation. "If you don't mind, I was wondering if you could help me? Has there been anything odd happening in this village lately?" The genin immediately began to shake and fidgeted with his fingers uncontrollably. "Oh, so you're a foreigner? I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about." Small beads of sweat started to form around his pale face. Naruto blinked and quirked an eyebrow. He wasn't trying to frighten the poor boy. He simply wanted to obtain information. Naruto decided honesty might be the best approach with the young genin. He dropped his standard conduct and spoke with his much more preferred manner. "Look, I'm actually a very strong shinobi from Konoha." He kept his tone low. "I'm worried about the people of this village, and if you know anything about what is going on around here, then please tell me, so I can help them." The genin seemed to calm down at Naruto's gentle words and looked around the immediate area. There was also a childish-like innocence in the blonde's blue eyes that resonated within the youth of the boy, something he hadn't seen from anyone before. "Okay, but not here." The genin looked down a closed-off alley. "Follow me." Naruto followed the young boy until they were safe from prying eyes and ears. The alley was dank and humid but drier than the street. Naruto leaned against one of the walls and gazed intently at the genin, waiting for his explanation. "Ever since our angel died years ago," he began, "we've had a lot of men come in and try to be our village leader. At first, We had a few of our jonin step up and try to lead, but many were too inexperienced to watch after an entire village. Finally, one of our strongest shinobi, Tsuji, decided to take over and things were fine for a little while. The genin struggled to continue. We were just fine until he came along, a gang leader named Noritaka. He's far stronger than our leader and could have easily defeated him, but instead of just killing him, he's using him. He works behind the scenes and tells Tsuji what to do. If our leader doesn't listen, Noritaka says he will massacre the entire village. The genin clenched his fists and started to shake again in resentment. The worst thing is that he's perfectly capable of doing just that. His gang is massive and strong. He wants to build a me up until it's strong enough to be a threat to even the shinobi union. For this reason, he's forced parents to make their children become ninja. I've never wanted to be a ninja. I don't like fighting, but he forced me to do it. If you disagree with him or don't do what he tells you, he gets rid of you. The genin started to weep. He's a murderer and a horrible man. I've even heard rumors about how he does even more terrible things to the civilians here. Worse things. Things he does in the night to women. Naruto felt a cold shudder run through his spine at the boy's words. This never would have happened if Lord Pain or God's Angel were still around. Naruto sighed. He remembered Nagato and Konan as well and missed them greatly. He knew if they were still alive today, then they never would have let any of this happen. But they weren't here, he was. The genin straightened himself and tried to wipe his flushed, tear-stained face. I shouldn't be crying, but I don't understand. Our angel said that we would always be protected by Naruto Uzumaki, the man that freed Lord Pain. The same man that saved the world years ago. But he hasn't saved us. Why? He buried his head into his small hands. Naruto closed his eyes for a second and was contemplative. If he had known beforehand, then maybe he could have done something. No, that wasn't fair. It wasn't his fault horrible circumstances occurred to good people. The lack of acting purely based off ignorance couldn't be used to condemn a person. What really mattered was what a person did in the present. They couldn't change the past. It hurt a person to fix their eyes on the past for too long. So, Naruto opened his eyes and stood upright. Tell me, have you ever seen Naruto Uzumaki? Naruto asked the boy. The genin lifted his eyes from his wet palms. No, I saw a picture once, but I don't really remember. His eyes widened when he gazed up into Naruto's ocean blue eyes. It may have been gray and stormy that day, but the genin always remembered seeing those eyes shine with brilliant radiance. In that moment, the boy realized the hero was here, and he forgot his sense of hopelessness. The war hero had an interesting way of doing that to people. Naruto leaned over and put his hand on the boy's head. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he announced with dynamism. I'm sorry it's taken so long. I promise I'll protect all of you. The young boy's eyes were filled with pure awe as Naruto made the strongest, yet simplest, declaration he had ever heard. Now, where is this Noritaka? The boy was speechless for a few seconds, but he quickly summoned his wits. He lives in Lord Pain's old building, the tallest tower in the city. You should find him there. The genin was still slightly dazed by Naruto's demeanor. Naruto nodded and turned his back on the genin. He took a few steps forward and without looking back, he gave his promise, I'll take care of it. With that, Naruto slowly marched down the alleyway. The genin stared at his back as he left. Something crossed the boy's mind as he saw the hero leave. It was not a careless thought nor an unrealistic one. The genin simply realized what a protector was. Many years later, he would tell others about what he saw that day. He would say he saw a man who took responsibility and thought of others before himself. He would say he saw a hero. Noritaka was by no means a foolish man. He was proud to say he was as shrewd and as cunning as his late father had been. Those who had known his father well agreed with him because they knew if he was anything like him at all, then it was best to concede with the man. They also knew Noritaka's temper was as short as his height. Of course, it was wise to not mention that in his presence. His father had passed away 3 years ago due to a deadly virus. After that, Noritaka had become the gang leader. For some time, Noritaka's gang had moved and robbed like common bandits in the wilderness until they had stumbled upon a meh. At the time, The village's shinobi forces were small and weak while their leader, Tsuji, was still unfamiliar with his new role. Noritaka took advantage of this and overwhelmed the young jonin. The man was by no means weak either, in fact, he was quite sufficient in Kenjutsu and Earth Release. Unfortunately for Tsuji, Noritaka was better. Instead of simply killing Tsuji, however, after he had defeated him, Noritaka concluded to lead the village in the shadows. He told Tsuji what to do, but to an outside viewer it would appear Tsuji was making all of the decisions. Most of the citizens had quickly figured out Noritaka was behind all the village dilemmas, but they were dealt with if they spoke up. As a result, no one said a word about Noritaka on fear of death or worse. All of Noritaka's men were skilled fighters and greatly outnumbered the Aimnin. Noritaka quickly put most of his men who were efficient enough with chakra into the Ame shinobi ranks to make sure there were no uprisings. As a result, almost all the shinobi officers were Noritaka's subordinates. It was easier to control the masses that way and was a great start to reaching his goals. Noritaka's men were aware of his hobbies and usually didn't speak about it in front of him. He would take women from the village at night and bring them into his chambers. Sometimes, the guards would have to clean up after their leader and would find some of the women dead. Even if they weren't dead, many times they begged to be. Noritaka's chambers were located high above the village in the tallest tower, adjacent to Tsuji's dwelling for good measure. That morning, Noritaka was greatly troubled and had been trying to eat his breakfast when one of his men entered the room. It was one of his officers and he bowed to Noritaka with great admiration. Noritaka looked up at him with irritation set in his beady eyes. He was a short and stocky man. He had tied his balding, dark hair back in a short ponytail and was currently wearing a green kimono. "What is it?" he asked, annoyed. The officer stood up and kept his face as emotionless as possible. "We have located Naruto Uzumaki. He was seen leaving his inn earlier this morning. Unfortunately, we quickly lost sight of him and are unable to locate his current whereabouts." Noritaka threw a half-filled bowl of miso at the officer, who suddenly dodged it and winced away from his leader. "Are you fucking joking?" Noritaka roared. The officer was noticeably startled by his leader's actions. His usual sallow face was visibly red. "You said you located him, but then you lost him? If you don't know where he is now, then why even bother telling me, you piece of shit?" The officer quickly bowed to apologize, but he still had more news to give. "Please forgive me, Noritaka-sama," the officer begged, "but the Chuchikage's granddaughter, Kurotsuchi, is here to see you again." Noritaka's demeanor instantly changed at that announcement. "Well, send her in." A large grin formed along his thick lips. The officer bowed one last time and left the room. Noritaka shifted in his seat and prepared himself mentally for his unexpected visitor. Despite his current good fortune, he had been on edge almost all yesterday. He received the report stating Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of the Fourth Shinobi World War, was temporarily residing in Amegakure. Noritaka had had enough to worry about when Kurotsuchi came to the village a week ago. Now he had to be cautious of one of the strongest men to ever live. Noritaka had no idea that by not sending reports to the Union, they would send Naruto Uzumaki and Kurotsuchi over. Was Ame really that big of a deal? He certainly didn't think so, but he had to remain calm. As long as he gave the Union what they wanted, and he kept his existence as hidden as possible, he'd be fine. Of course, as soon as he heard the lovely Kurotsuchi was staying in his village, he had invited her up to his chambers. She had been stoic and stone-cold to his advances, but he knew he would win in the end. She was strong, but Noritaka was positive he and his men could overpower her without suffering considerable losses. As long as Uzumaki didn't come into the picture and he kept Kurotsuchi close, he would thrive in the shadows. Kurotsuchi glided into the room as Noritaka was deep in thought. She stood in front of him wearing a long red dress underneath a black travel cloak. Her vibrant, pink eyes stared coldly at him. He wanted so badly to see those eyes look at him with fear and submission. Soon, he told himself. Very soon. "Kurotsuchi, my dear," he vociferated with a large, oily grin as he stood up. She was easily a head taller than he was. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I thought we already settled everything." She scowled. "I ran into Naruto Uzumaki yesterday," she said with malice etched into her voice. Guess what he told me? Noritaka blinked and shrugged, hoping to feign ignorance. She didn't seem to care whether he knew or not. He said that you haven't been sending reports to Konoha, either. She leaned forward so her eyes were level with his and gave him an intimidating glare. Why is that, Noritaka? He swallowed down a nervous lump in his throat and collected himself. When Kurotsuchi had entered the village a week ago, she had immediately began asking questions to all his officers. She proved herself to be an extremely audacious and intrusive kunoichi. It hadn't taken her long to find out Noritaka was the true leader of the village, and she had questioned his intentions and methods of leadership. He provided everything she demanded until she was supposedly satisfied. But she still didn't leave, and Noritaka was having a hard time wondering if that was a benefit to him or not. Now that Uzumaki was around, he felt it wasn't the former. Of course, that makes sense, doesn't it? He tried to etch a sincere and calm smile onto his features. Kurotsuchi raised an eyebrow. You're all part of the shinobi union, aren't you? I would only need to send one report to one of you and then you would all have it, correct? And the reason I wasn't sending any reports before was because you didn't think you had to, considering you're not actually part of the shinobi union? Yeah, I know. She crossed her arms and exhaled slowly. She still didn't seem satisfied. Precisely, replied Noritaka. So, I'm having difficulty trying to see what the problem is. Noritaka feigned his best version of an innocent expression. Kurotsuchi felt embarrassed and that furthered her ire. She hadn't analyzed any of that. The shinobi union was less than a year old, and it was easy to forget about their policies considering it was still relatively new. However, the fact that Noritaka knew about the regulations better than her when he claimed he wanted no part in it raised her suspicions. She didn't trust the man and had good reason to think so. She had heard the rumors about the missing women around the village. She had no direct proof yet, and until she found it, she wasn't leaving Ame anytime soon. Fine then. I'm still not done with you yet, though, so you better not slither away behind my back, alright? Noritaka expressed a fulsome grin. Where would I go, my dear? Please, if you require anything else from me, don't hesitate to ask. Kurotsuchi gave a huff, rolled her eyes, and swiftly left the room without another word. Once she was gone, Noritaka exhaled with great potency. He felt like he was holding his breath the entire time he was under that intense, coral-colored gaze. He wouldn't stand for such blatant defiance and disrespect. The Iwanin needed to be taught proper discipline. Yes, she was easily a cage-level shinobi, but he had ways to work around that. Noritaka called for one of his guards he knew was in the area. His guard knelt before him silently, waiting for his orders. Noritaka spoke with crisp composure. Our guest has overstayed her welcome. Get the 8 strongest together. I recommend you strike when she is resting. Do it tonight. I would like you to bring her back alive, but if you have to kill her. The guard bowed. He performed a shunshin out of the room and left Noritaka to his thoughts. He stood up and looked out one of his windows upon the rainy village below. He grinned at the prospect of controlling more than just the small village and couldn't wait to have a pleading Kurotsuchi in his hands. Naruto felt the rain drop upon his exposed skin as he maneuvered through the busy streets towards the tallest tower of the village. The rain around him was cool, but his blood felt hot. The information the genin had given Naruto was slowly enraging the blonde with every step he took. He thought he had already handled all the evil in the world. Many of his friends and allies had died trying to bring about this era of peace, and the fact that there were still monsters out there infuriated him. He was not about to let other people suffer, especially if there was something he could do to help. As he swiftly turned a street corner, Naruto saw a flash of red pass him and turned his head to examine it. The source of the vivid color also turned their head. Naruto and Kurotsuchi fastened their gazes to each other and both pairs of eyes widened in bewilderment. Suddenly, Naruto felt his rage subside when her rosy eyes bore into his. They both had stopped in motion, and for a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the rain falling around them. Naruto noticed a hint of aggression in Kurotsuchi's expression, but he quickly deduced it wasn't directed at him. She must have just finished speaking with someone who really irritated her. Naruto wanted to say something similar to what he had said the day before, something witty or charming, she beat him to it. "Where are you going, hero?" she asked brusquely. Naruto was slightly startled by her straightforward question, but he also detected there was no bitterness in her tone. "To the leader of this village," he replied. "I've got to talk to him." He didn't need to be secretive with her and wasn't proficient at doing so anyways. He wanted to speak with her more and greatly enjoyed her presence, but his sense of duty outweighed his feelings at that moment. He was about to turn around and head towards his destination when to his astonishment he felt a strong grip on his bandaged arm that held him back. He looked over at Kurotsuchi to analyze her expression. There was a trace of concern buried in her face and any lingering thoughts of justice left his mind at the wondrous sight. Naruto could have easily freed himself from her grasp, but he certainly didn't want to not with a look like that. "Please, don't go," she mumbled over the noise of water splashing around them. Naruto was speechless. Her eyes were downcast, and he detected an odd emotion in them. Was she actually worried about him? She surely knew how strong he was and how he could take care of himself, so it couldn't be a question of prowess. Naruto was seriously confused. This was different from the confident and evasive woman that he had met yesterday. "Why?" he asked. Kurotsuchi squeezed his arm gently, and she tried to not consider his eyes. She didn't want him to confront Noritaka. She knew that if the two met, Naruto would immediately apprehend the man and punish him for his transgressions. He could detect the evil intent in men, and it wouldn't be difficult for the blonde to see the corruption in Noritaka's heart. If he did all that without inexcusable proof, Noritaka would be able to squeak by, and Naruto would have to suffer the political ramifications of his actions. For a man wanting to be the next Hokage, it was best his reputation remained positive. Of course, her logic was clearly flawed. The residents of Ame were acutely aware of Noritaka's habits and would have easily stood behind the war hero if such a situation called for it. But she didn't consider this in that moment. Her mind was too addled with other problems, other worries of psious shades and visions. The one other reason Kurotsuchi didn't want Naruto to run in there was because of her sense of responsibility. She knew he could take care of himself, but Noritaka's gang was massive and were extremely unfair in their fighting styles. Despite her better reasoning, Kurotsuchi was, in fact, worried about him. She couldn't say that, though. She cleared her throat and attempted to think of a tactic to distract him, just for tonight. Her face heated up at the idea that crossed her mind, but she was certain it would work. "Because I would like you to accompany me for dinner," she finally said. She couldn't dissipate the obvious blush showing on her face. Naruto had been surprised a lot in these last few moments, but the amazement evident in his eyes was far greater this time around. He was so shocked by the declaration that he said nothing for several seconds. He forgot all about his recent mission in that moment. Kurotsuchi released her grip on his arm and looked uncomfortable at his silence. This action broke him out of his stupor. "Of course," he answered. Why in the world was he agreeing to such a horribly timed date? Many years later, Naruto would look back in reflection at this meeting where he learned something rather miraculous about females. When they wanted something bad enough, they typically got their way. The blonde needed to save the village, but a beautiful woman was requesting his company. He blinked. Where would you like to go?" Kurotsuchi looked across the street at a ramen stand, and she pointed to it. "What about there?" She saw a wide grin form around Naruto's face. Maybe one quick meal couldn't hurt, he thought. He nodded happily and the two shinobi strolled side by side to the small stand. They passed under the stand's banners and took their seats at the counter. After announcing their orders to the ramen chef, he retreated to the back and they were left alone. Naruto was still slightly dazed by Kurotsuchi's invitation to dinner and was having trouble deciding what to say to her. He looked over at her with the corner of his eye. She was looking straight ahead and appeared to be unsettled about their current situation. Naruto was unsure about her intentions, and he didn't like the sense of uneasiness growing between the two of them with every passing second. He cleared his throat loudly to get her attention. Kurotsuchi gazed at him inquisitively. "How's your grandfather?" he asked. He wasn't an expert at small talk, so he tried to ask about things he was genuinely interested in. He liked Onaki and hadn't seen the old man in a few years. His question was sincere even if it was relatively trivial. Kurotsuchi didn't seem to be bothered by his poor attempt to start a conversation. His back is still awful, but he's as strong as ever. That old man isn't going to die anytime soon. Naruto observed the amused glint in her eye when she spoke about the Sandaimechu Chikage. He liked talking about loved ones with other people in a positive manner, it was something he could easily relate with. She kept her gaze fixed on him. "How's that Hokage of yours doing?" Naruto grinned happily at the thought of his sensei. "He's great. Super busy, but still very healthy. Konoha is fantastic, and they're really enjoying the peacetime. The Shinobi Union has been really helping the economy now that all of the shinobi are working together." Kurotsuchi nodded and looked up at the chef who had set down the 2 orders of ramen in front of them. They thanked the chef, said grace, and began to eat their dinner. They ate in relative silence for some time with a few questions and answers strewn about between the 2 of them. "How did you know that I had a deep love for ramen?" Naruto asked after the conversation ebbed into a more carefree tone. Despite his enjoyment over the pleasant meal, the apparent danger of the village was still in the back of his mind. Kurotsuchi's eyes widened a tad at the question, but then a gleeful smile formed around her delicate lips. "I didn't. It was just a rough guess. Plus." A twinkle shined through her rosy eyes. "I like it, too." This was a woman after his own heart. After the discussion reached the surface, Naruto began to realize he loved the way Kurotsuchi would speak her mind on occasion without thinking. It reminded him of himself sometimes. That trait had been especially problematic for him at a younger age, but it was one of the things people admired about him. After their bowls were emptied and the ramen chef was paid, the 2 shinobi left the ramen stand. Naruto looked around the rainy environment and noticed it was already past dusk. He was losing time, there were lives on the line. But his selfishness, not an eccentricity he particularly considered, stopped him when Kurotsuchi gave him a small smile. He decided on handling Noritaka after escorting Kurotsuchi back to her quarters. She had agreed to his proposal and the 2 of them set a slow pace towards her inn. Along the way, Naruto turned his head and looked at her. He felt like he still barely knew her and that bothered him. Their conversations had been simple and light, and he wanted to change that. With the sound of their feet splashing into puddles and the mudded water forming around them, Naruto asked, "Why do you want to be the Chuchikage, Kurotsuchi?" She didn't seem to be startled by the question, but she did take some time to respond. Eventually, her eyes glazed over. "I remember what you told Obito Uchiha during the war along with every other member of the Shinobi Alliance about how Hokage is not only the strongest shinobi in the village but also the one who cares the most. They are the one who is willing to go with their comrades into the unknown. I realized then that was what I wanted to be, too." She looked up at him and a sincere, warm smile enveloped her face. "Basically, you inspired me, Naruto." Naruto felt the impact of that smile, and it was mesmerizing. "I'm glad," he remarked. "That's a wonderful reason. I think you're going to make a great Chuchikage, Kurotsuchi." Kurotsuchi turned her face away from him, hoping to hide her creeping blush. She thanked him as they reached the entrance to the inn she was staying at. She gazed up at him once again and bowed slightly. "Thanks for accompanying me to dinner and escorting me here." She kept her tone polite but didn't see a need to cover up her gratitude for his company. She had forgotten all about her initial reason for inviting him. Naruto grinned. "You're welcome, Kurotsuchi. Let me know if you need me for anything else. Have a good night." He made his way down the road and waved to her. Kurotsuchi gave a small wave back as she retired for the night. "Night, hero." Naruto had a large smile on his face as he stepped through the rain. His mood was bouncy, and he felt exuberant. He was in such an elated state that he almost didn't notice a small dog on the side of the street. The messenger dog barked at Naruto, and he looked down to realize it was one of Kakashi's summons. There was a small scroll in its mouth, and after he reached down and took the scroll, the dog vanished in a cloud of smoke. Naruto found a nearby awning to read without getting the scroll wet and opened the message to read its contents. "Dear Naruto. Your report seems pretty standard, and I appreciate the information. Keep up the good work. I'm glad to hear that you made it to Amegakure. The intelligence you provided about your suspicions regarding the village should be further investigated. As for the Chuchikage's granddaughter, I had no idea she was on a similar mission. The Union failed to enlighten me on that fact. They also should have told me they already sent Kurotsuchi to investigate Ame. Sorry about that. We're still trying to perfect our communication methods. Apparently, Onaki is just as shrewd and calculating as you would expect him to be. I had been hoping I was the only one to suggest a great plan, but I guess that old man thought of the same thing. Originality isn't my strong suit, I guess. Report back when you can. Sincerely. Kakashi Hatake. Rokudaime Hokage. Naruto smiled at the Hokage's professional yet personal writing. After he was finished reading, he put the scroll into his satchel. He was about to head back to his inn when he felt something odd. He detected a presence above him. He concealed himself underneath the awning and waited for the person to move. It seemed they didn't know he was there and moved over to the building next to him. Naruto silently jumped up to the top of the building and hid behind some wooden crates. Crouching a few feet in front of him was a masked shinobi covered all in black. They had a wireless radio attached to their ear and were speaking to someone over it. Naruto listened in on their conversation. The target has been dropped off, the shinobi stated over the radio. The Konoha walked her back to the inn. He's gone now. She has retired to her bedroom. Once she has fallen asleep, we will proceed with the plan. Naruto narrowed his eyes and balled his fists. It was clear who they were after, and he wasn't going to let their mission be successful. He noticed the Ame symbol on the shinobi's headband. Naruto needed to locate the other shinobi that were surely in the vicinity. He sat down and tried not to move. He let the cool rain douse him as he felt the natural energy pass and circulate throughout the air. Even in this urban area, there was plenty to work with. After less than a minute of not moving, Naruto opened his yellow eyes to reveal the toad-like irises underneath. He hastily detected there were 7 more shinobi around the area. Each were scattered in different locations but were still relatively close to him. He quietly created 7 clones, masking their presence with careful precision. He gave each one a minute amount of chakra. He was confident it wouldn't take much. The clones swiftly dispersed off to their respective targets. Once the clones were in position behind each of their targets among the surrounding buildings, they waited for the original Naruto to give the mental order. With the beat of falling rain there to keep his head level, Naruto concentrated and gave the order. Regrettably, one of the clones hit a small kin when approaching its target and alerted the nearby shinobi. The aim-nin yelled over their radio and the assassins were alarmed by the clone's presence. The shinobi near the original Naruto quickly turned around only to see a small Rasengan being pushed into his chest. The aim-nin fell off the side of the building completely incapacitated. Naruto felt 4 of his clones' memories hit him consecutively. Those 4 had managed to knock out their targets while the other 3 were having trouble. Naruto performed a shunshin over to the nearest one and saw his clone sparring with one of the assassins. Naruto had trained his clones to be far sturdier than they were in the past. They could take a punch or two despite his careful fabrication of the last ones and were proven to be great replicas of the original. The clone distracted the aim-nin long enough for the original Naruto to throw a nature-enhanced punch into his skull. The shinobi flew into a pile of wooden crates and slipped into an unconscious state. Naruto suddenly felt the memories of the other 2 clones hit him, and he turned his back to find the last 2 Ame shinobi standing behind him. Of course, he had already sensed them. Perhaps, he thought to himself, he should have applied more chakra to his clones. Well, it's not like he was in trouble, after all. These guys were not to be underestimated, but his confidence was having a hard time staying still. Naruto ran through the different scenarios and tactics he could use on the 2 of them, but before he could execute any of them, both shinobi fell to the ground dead with a kunai lodged into each of the opponent's necks. He looked over to gaze upon a soaked Kurotsuchi dressed in an ornate red nightgown. "You make way too much noise, hero," she chided with playful intent. She motioned to her wet nightwear. "Also, you owe me a new nightgown." Naruto shook his head in disbelief and began to laugh. He should have been questioning how he hadn't even noticed her, but instead he was enamored by that smirk she was displaying. This girl was something else, he mused as he reflected on the cheerful glint in Kurotsuchi's pink eyes. Chapter 3, Let It Rain. The rain cleaved through the silky night. The water painted sable by the darkness splashed against the quiet village. The civilians were used to such weather and had grown accustomed to the sound of water trickling on their home, washing away what it could. Rain was all they had ever known, and they loved and loathed its existence equally. Their leaders were either wondrous deities or despicable tyrants, and they only prayed that when a new one appeared from the rain, they would be the former. The people of Amegakure could only hope for peace and had decided long ago they would take whatever was given to them. They had deemed the reality of their situation was better to cope with than change, hoping to accept the false peace over the real thing. On a particular night that would later decide the foreseeable future of Ame, 2 foreign shinobi were on a mission to change that very dynamic. "Wow, you really messed this guy up," Kurotsuchi commented as they observed the giant spiral wound in the Aimnin's abdomen. Naruto scratched his head in embarrassment. He thought he had done a sufficient job holding back, but he still left the shinobi severely injured. Thankfully, he was still alive. Kurotsuchi crouched down and pulled off the shinobi's mask to reveal a man's visage. Kurotsuchi splashed a kinful of rainwater on the unconscious man's face. He sputtered and groaned out of his stupor. The man slowly opened his eyes and looked up to see a pair of fiery, pink eyes glaring down at him. He opened his mouth to yell, but Kurotsuchi covered it with her hand and spoke with a chilling inflection. "If the next words out of your mouth aren't about the name and location of the one who sent you, I'm going to reach down into that wound and tear out your fucking intestines." The man widened his dark eyes in bewilderment. Naruto also appeared to be baffled by Kurotsuchi's intimidation methods. The Aimnin was trembling with extreme fear and began to stutter uncontrollably. Sorry. Amen Noritaka. He sent me." "Thought so," Kurotsuchi said nonchalantly as she stood up and turned her back to the man. Naruto raised an eyebrow in her direction, and she looked up at him coolly. "Let's go, hero." As the kunoichi ventured farther out, Naruto paused and looked over at the man. He was still shaking and whimpering. With pity for him, Naruto concluded he was no longer a threat and followed after the retreating form of Kurotsuchi. Shoko's family had lived in Amegakure for generations. There had been numerous leaders who had made various promises throughout the years about how they would change the quality of the village. It was always the same thing, just more empty promises. The angel and Lord Pain had gotten closer than anyone else. Tsuji was a great and compassionate leader, but he was never allowed to thrive. Noritaka had come and changed that. Shoko was used to it by now. Misfortune was as constant in the village as the rain was. Shoko hated the rain. She wanted to know what the sun felt like again. Sunshine in Ame was extremely rare. It seemed that the occurrence of sunshine was parallel with the presence of a good leader. It was just another disappointment. Shoko's husband had passed away over a year ago due to a virus, so now it was only her and her daughter. Her daughter, Megami, was a beautiful and kind young lady. The sheer amount of suitors Shoko had to manage on a daily basis were baffling. Shoko loved Megami. She knew that no matter who the leader was or what horrible atrocities occurred in the world, as long as Megami was with her, Shoko could endure. Shoko had never wanted any of this to happen. She had only done what she thought was right. The shinobi had come to her house that night and told her Noritaka, their great village leader, required her daughter. Shoko had pleaded against it and begged them to reconsider. In the end, the only way they would be appeased was if someone took her daughter's place. So, she agreed to go with them to Noritaka if they left Megami unharmed. She had never been more reluctant. The 2 guards practically dragged her through the flooded streets. The rain doused Shoko's hair, and she wanted to scream because of her unfortunate circumstances. She only wanted to be with Megami and not in the rain. The rain only seemed to bring suffering and misery. Shoko had heard the saying around the village that stated the rain cleansed all the pain and worry people had, but she didn't believe that. Her past had never attested to that, and it certainly didn't now. Rain didn't clean anything, it was only a symbol for the sorrow. It had rained when her husband died, it rained when her parents died, it was raining now, it was raining in her heart, it was always raining in Shoko's life. She wondered what the sun would bring if she could see it. It must have been better than this. When they were only a block from the tower, one of the shinobi carrying Shoko looked at the other with lecherous intent in his eye. "Should we warm her up before we give her to him?" the Aimnin asked his partner with a sickening grin. The other ninja mirrored his grin and agreed. Shoko felt fear grip her soul and chill her conscience. The shinobi pushed her against a wall, and she yelped sharply from the pain. The man slapped her and began ripping off her dress. The rain descended upon her exposed skin, and the shinobi held down her legs while the other one began undoing his pants. She wanted to fight back and struggle, but she didn't see the point anymore. Bad events always happened in her life, it was just how life was. Shoko looked straight above her as the rain tried to make her forget. The rain kept falling. Suddenly, a giant, blue ball of spinning chakra flew straight into the Aimnin standing up, and he was immediately thrown several meters away into the opposite wall. A large cavity was formed in the concrete from the strong impact. The other shinobi who was crouched holding down Shoko's legs jumped up in a startled manner. He grabbed a kunai from his pouch and positioned himself into a combat stance. He couldn't see the attacker. He looked around his location with a panicked expression, his eyes darting back and forth with desperation. For a few moments, there was nothing. Then in one swift moment, a tall figure charged the man and incapacitated him with a solid punch to the jaw. Shoko fell into a seated position with her back against the wall and looked up to witness her liberator. Shoko's eyes widened at the sight of an extremely attractive blonde man she immediately recognized. The war hero, Naruto Uzumaki, smiled down at her with his messy, wet hair hanging loosely across his brow. He reached out his hand, and she grabbed it with disbelief. He pulled her up to a standing position, and she wondered why she didn't feel the rain anymore. It was still falling, she was certain of that, but she seemed to have forgotten about it. Naruto asked if she was all right, and she simply nodded. Shoko heard a feminine voice call from the end of the street, and Naruto looked over in that direction. Shoko saw a dark-haired woman gesturing for him to hurry up. He smiled sheepishly at Shoko. "Sorry about that. I got to go. Take care." He disappeared into the curtain of the night. Shoko stood and stared into the rain for quite some time. The rain kept falling, and she decided it wasn't that bad, after all. The hero had barely spoken to her, but just his mere presence had given her the sunshine she had always craved. She had always thought the rain was her enemy and that no good ever came from it, but at that moment, Shoko realized the rain had its own redeeming qualities. Maybe she could learn to enjoy it. Sunshine was overrated, anyways. Noritaka was growing impatient. Where was his woman? He had asked for the gorgeous young woman who lived with her mother earlier that day and had been waiting for what seemed like hours. Noritaka wanted to let out all of his recent pent-up frustration, and now there was nothing to release it out on. He grabbed his katana and marched down the hall adjacent to his room. Noritaka banged against the door at the end of the hall. A tall, broad-shouldered young man opened the door and looked down at Noritaka. The amount of contempt in the young man's eyes was palpable. Noritaka frowned and pushed the man back farther into the room. "Suji!" Noritaka yelled. "Spar with me." Without saying anything, Suji stepped over to a small chest and took out his sword from it. He then nodded to Noritaka and left the room. Noritaka made a disgruntled noise with his mouth and followed after the young man. They traveled a few floors down via a wooden staircase until they came to a large room inlaid with tatami mats. Suji stood in place on the far side of the room and took his fighting stance without a single word to his opponent. He raised his sword in front of him and appeared to be calm. Noritaka growled and took his unique fighting stance where he held the blade of the katana parallel to his face with the sharp edge aimed upwards. Before either man moved, Suji was already infusing earth-natured chakra into his sword, making it more durable. Once he had a suitable amount of chakra in his blade, Suji dashed forward and swung his sword for Noritaka's chest. Noritaka parried the attack and launched his fist heavily into Suji's stomach. Suji backed away wincing and Noritaka jumped towards him, swinging at his feet. Suji attempted to dodge the attack but the front of his legs were slashed, albeit not deeply. Suji felt the stinging pain in his legs and tried to ignore it. Before Suji could move, Noritaka moved behind him with extreme speed and cut into his opponent's back. Suji fell to the mats with his back bleeding profusely, and Noritaka stood over him with a disappointed expression. "That was quicker than last time, Suji," Noritaka said languidly. "The gap is getting larger between us, it seems." Suji loathed the smile that formed on Noritaka's lips. Tragic. Noritaka sheathed his sword and tied it to his waist. He stepped away from his defeated opponent and headed for the direction of the exit. Before Noritaka exited the room, a large shockwave reverberated throughout the building and caused the small man to fall to his knees. Noritaka looked around incredulously and pondered where the source of such an explosion came from. With Tsuji completely forgotten, Noritaka left the room and went back to the long flight of wooden stairs. He peered down to see if there was any evidence of what was causing the sudden commotion in his tower. He saw one of his guards running desperately up the stairs, and when he saw Noritaka, a wave of relief crossed over his features. "Noritaka-sama," the guard shouted from below, "we have intruders." Noritaka frowned and called down to him. "Who are they?" The guard's frightened eyes made Noritaka uneasy, his voice dropping. "Our two guests." All of a sudden, the stairs started to creak and snap as another shockwave far stronger than the earlier one vibrated through the wood. Vital stress points were broken in the stairs and the entire construct began to fall apart. Noritaka infused chakra into his feet and hands and hung to the concrete wall as the wooden stairs were destroyed. The guard he had been conversing with was not so lucky. A wooden beam had struck his head and dazed him enough to fall with the rubble around him. After the stairs were reduced to a messy pile of wood and the dust settled, Noritaka climbed up to the entryway he had entered from only moments ago. He glanced down at the wooden pile hundreds of feet below. There was a protracted, eerie moment of cracking wood and jumbled debris rising from the destruction below. Noritaka's beady eyes scanned the wreckage for the cause of such misfortune. His expression of scrutiny turned into sheer terror when a flash of yellow appeared out of thin air before him. In a split second, Noritaka was able to discern the flash as a large, powerful figure. The second after, he recalled seeing his adversary's eyes. They were blue. The figure was suspended in the air for a moment and quickly swung his leg directly into Noritaka's neck with such extreme force that the small man was sent flying off into the room behind him, breaking into several solid walls. Naruto dropped onto the ledge and stepped into the room. He noticed the bleeding form of an Aimnin next to him and walked over to investigate him. Naruto asked Kurama to give the poor man some chakra to heal him, and the tailed beast obliged. As the red chakra began to heal Tsuji, Naruto turned his attention to the giant hole in the wall on the far side of the room. Naruto stood in place until he saw Noritaka emerge from the rubble. The small man was covered in scrapes and bruises. He coughed when he came into view. Noritaka glowered at Naruto and reached for his katana that was still sheathed and strapped to his side. He drew the blade and took his stance. Naruto stared at him with stoic composure. Noritaka grinned at his teeth in fury. "I don't care how strong you are, Uzumaki. I'll fucking key." Noritaka had never witnessed such speed before, when it practically seemed that the blonde shinobi several meters in front of him had teleported to only a meter to his right. Noritaka was unable to finish his sentence because his enemy had thrown a punch into his cheek, and he was once again flown across the room and into the contiguous wall. He fell to the ground in a heap and struggled to get to his feet. Naruto stood with the same stoic expression and spoke to the man. "A great fighter should acknowledge his opponent's strength," Naruto stated simply. Noritaka clenched his fists and finally rose to his feet. "You think you're just the shit, don't you? This is my village." "No." Naruto's interjection was strong and tenacious. "This is not your village to control. It never was. You're no leader. You've never shown any reason to deserve that title." Noritaka was shaking with anger. "And you know what a leader is, Uzumaki?" he asked with venom in his voice. Naruto nodded and tilted his head slightly. "Yes, not because I am one but because of the great ones I've seen." Naruto smirked gently and lowered his eyelids. "A leader shows compassion and continually works for those he leads. He paves the road for them to walk on and ventures out on that road with them." Naruto frowned and pointed an accusing finger at Noritaka. "You're not a leader. You're scum." Noritaka felt like his teeth would break from how much pressure he was forcing upon them. He screamed in fury and ran towards Naruto. The blonde remained still as his opponent forgot himself. Noritaka yelled, "You're fucking dead, you piece dash!" When he was a few feet from him, a flash of red rushed at him and threw him to the ground. Kurotsuchi stood over Noritaka with a kunai, and the pale man stared with raised eyebrows at her. She looked at him with disgust. "Shut the hell up, she uttered. In one motion, she sliced into Noritaka's throat and silenced him forever. Naruto looked at her inquisitively, and Kurotsuchi shrugged at him as she stood up from her opponent's corpse. "Sorry I took so long," she said with no actual apologetic tone in her voice whatsoever. "He really did have an army." She observed the two giant holes in the surrounding walls and smirked sardonically at Naruto. "I'm surprised you didn't kill him in one hit." Her rosy eyes glistened in the dim lighting. "I know you could have." Naruto gave her a wry smile. "I didn't want to kill him." He didn't say anything else and made his way to a healing Tsuji. Naruto nodded to him with concern lacing his countenance. "You okay?" Tsuji sat up and bowed slightly to Naruto. "Thank you. I wish I could have taken care of him myself, but I wasn't str." Naruto cut him off, shaking his head. "Didn't you hear what I just told him? Strength has nothing to do with it." Tsuji looked at Naruto with awe. "Just pave the way." Naruto handed him a scroll and gestured to Kurotsuchi. She acknowledged him, and they quickly vanished from the room in two separate clouds of smoke. Tsuji looked down at the scroll in his hand and opened it. It was a formal invitation to join the Shinobi Union. Tsuji lowered the scroll and thought about what Naruto told him. He knew the war hero was right, and he felt his determination grow with every passing second. He would be a great leader for Amegakure and would help the citizens rebuild what they had lost. Tsuji saw a light that day when he met Naruto Uzumaki, and he was not going to ignore it. "I'm glad I can finally leave this reign," Kurotsuchi exclaimed as the two shinobi marched across the large lake that surrounded Ame. Naruto halted in place, ripples formed gently from where he stood and intermingled with the wrinkles caused by the many raindrops around them. "I'm going to Sunagakure." Naruto made his declaration while directly facing Kurotsuchi. He couldn't ask her to come with him. But he wanted her to. He wanted to say many things to her, but the more he thought about what he was going to say, the more he found opportunities to be rejected. Despite all of this, he still enjoyed being around her. Kurotsuchi sighed and didn't look him in the eye. "I'm going to Tetsu no Kuni." They sensed the tense atmosphere then and neither party knew how to handle it. "I need to go to Union headquarters." She gazed at Naruto from the corner of her eye. He was staring at her with a somber expression. Her heart sank slightly at seeing him make that face. She didn't want to leave him either. She took a deep breath and decided to give in. "But I think we should meet up later." She could feel her face get hot at her suggestion. Naruto's eyes filled with hope, and he grinned cheerfully. "I'll see you in 3 weeks, then." Kurotsuchi nodded and imitated his grin. "Okay, I'll meet you in Kusagakure." She turned north, but before she took another step, she looked back at him. "Take care, hero." With that, they went their separate ways. As Naruto made his way southwest, he wondered if he would miss the rain. It had a certain charm about it that spoke of tranquility and life's abundant nature, but without Kurotsuchi, it lacked something somehow. Naruto tried to pinpoint what exactly that something was. It might have been her strong and unfaltering attitude that made the rain more dynamic. Or it could have been the way her smile flashed with the rain droplets. He was not really sure, but he definitely knew it was better when she was around. The sun would be out when Naruto would leave the country, and he surmised even that might not be as grand without her. Chapter 4, Sand and Snow. Blankets of snow covered the fir trees and the small path was only made apparent by the subtle gaps between them. The hazy, cloudy sky hung over the world, tenderly promising that more snow would come, despite the fact that it was considered summer in most parts of the world. She marveled in the beauty surrounding her. She would frequently stop to hear the natural silence of the snow-covered environment, even though she had been in a rush most of the last few days. When she did that, it seemed that time stopped and she was able to fully cherish the moment she had been given. She felt alone in that moment, but it was a more solitary moment than destitute. She was not a person that minded being a part of solitude as long as the intervals were not too long. Her feet crunched into the snow with every step she took as she began to climb up a small incline. The horizon was blocked by the hill and she was unable to physically tell what was on the other side. However, because she was familiar with the path, she did actually have an inkling of what was beyond the incline. When she had reached the apex of the hill, she smiled down on the recognizable sight before her. The giant, overhanging mountains known as the Three Wolves stood fiercely in the bleak environment. Kurotsuchi had been traveling for roughly 3 days now since she had last left Amegakure. She had entered Tetsu no Kuni earlier that day and had arrived a day early. The monthly shinobi union meeting was scheduled to begin tomorrow and she had trouble trying to pinpoint why she had rushed her way here. It certainly was not for worry of being late to the meeting, so what was it? Why did she have an anxious feeling gnawing at her the entire journey? There were times when she was completely uncertain, but then there were other instances, moments right before she drifted off to sleep for the night where she had seen glimpses of ocean blue shades, golden sunsets, and warm smiles. She often directly thought of the blonde shinobi she had left back in Ame. She had to admit, he was a man of good character and was certainly strong. Kurotsuchi would be lying if she said she was not attracted to the man. A true man knew what to do and did it, accordingly. Naruto Uzumaki was a man and that thought enticed her. Kurotsuchi was not a teenager anymore and knew she had to do something about her feelings for the blonde, but she was not really certain of what to do. She was hesitant of making the first move, despite her audacious personality. Even if she did something, how would he respond? Would he be interested? The man could probably have any girl he wanted, but she was fairly certain he was currently single. Still, it was not wise to assume too much. She decided she would ask him next time they met. In spite of all these thoughts, she knew one of them was certain: she yearned to see Naruto again. As she neared the entrance, her gaze drifted to the setting sun. It was just able to peek out between the clouds as it vanished beneath the horizon. The clouds surrounding it were thin enough to change from a lifeless gray to a mixture of pinks and golds. Kurotsuchi stopped for a moment to fully appreciate the beauty of the sunset she was witnessing. Tetsu no Kuni was not known for its beautiful sunsets, but Kurotsuchi concluded that anywhere was surely capable of such beauty. Lately, Kurotsuchi reflected on the fact that whenever she saw the refinement of the world, it was lacking something. Perhaps, not the beauty itself but the experience of it. The fact that she was viewing it alone and the realization that it could be so much better if someone was there to appreciate it with her. But not just anybody, no, it had to be someone truly special, someone that understood it like she did. She wanted a partner to enjoy truth and beauty with her. The kunoichi sighed and surmised that she would have what she craved eventually. She faced the entrance to the headquarters that had been built into one of the 3 mountains. 2 samurai guards, dressed in their silvery, metallic armor, recognized her and stood in formation. They gestured formally to her and allowed her to pass silently. She opened the tall, wooden doors herself with apparent ease and stepped in. A large, recognizable foyer opened up before Kurotsuchi and she made her way through it, passing more stationary samurai along the way. Finally, Kurotsuchi entered a medium-sized room with a thick, round table stationed in the center. Sitting at the opposite side of the table was the head representative and chief organizer of the Shinobi Union, Shikamaru Nara. The reserved man was the only one present in the room and had a glass of water situated on the table next to him. He appeared to be taking a nap when Kurotsuchi walked in, but he quickly opened his eyes when he detected her presence. Kurotsuchi smirked at him and maintained eye contact when his eyes opened. Shikamaru stared at her blankly. "You're early," he said. Kurotsuchi withheld a sarcastic reply and took her seat across from him. She nodded politely and scanned the room. "I'm the only one who is, I take it." Her question lingered for a soft moment in the air as Shikamaru closed his eyes once again. "Yep, Kojiro should be here tonight. Tamari is finishing up a mission and will be here tomorrow. Mifune is naturally here in the building but I believe he is resting and I have no idea where Omoi is." A small smirk formed on his lips for a second. "Of course, I never really do." Shikamaru appeared to be perturbed by his explanation and laid his head back. Kurotsuchi rolled her eyes and pondered how a man could appear to be so lazy. She knew that most of the time it was kind of an act he put on, especially now that he was older and wiser. She enjoyed seeing his mask break when someone mentioned something of great interest to him. His eyes would dart to the source and would widen ever so slightly. His posture would straighten and his attention would focus on that specific person. Kurotsuchi was aware of when it was all happening and could detect the subtle intricacies within a scant second. She opened her mouth and said the name that always broke the mask. I ran into Naruto Uzumaki in Ame, she announced with a sly smile creasing her lips. Just as she predicted, Shikamaru's attention was directed upon her instantly. He did not ask any questions because they both knew she was going to continue without them. Still, the temptation of making him squirm almost made her relent. He's fine. We eliminated the problem in Ame. I'll give you the full report tomorrow. Based on Shikamaru's delicate eye movements, Kurotsuchi realized the Konohanin did not really care about any of that. She sighed and kept her smirk. He left for Suna. He probably wants to meet with the Kazekage. At that moment, Kurotsuchi remembered an important fact. He gave a scroll to the leader of Ame that invited their village to the union. Her eyes narrowed slightly in thought. How did he get that? Shikamaru folded his arms behind his head and leaned back in his chair. No idea. The Hokage probably gave him those invitations without my knowledge. It doesn't matter, I was going to invite Ame to the union anyways. He shrugged with reserved amusement present in his expression. Naruto simply saved us some time. Without fully realizing it, Kurotsuchi had a small, wistful smile on her lips when she thought of the blonde hero. Shikamaru noticed it out of the corner of his eye. We can talk more about this at the meeting tomorrow, he said, closing his eyes again. Your usual chambers are already prepared for you. See you tomorrow. Kurotsuchi knew there was nothing left to say, so she silently left her seat and made her way to her prepared room. Her room was a few levels above the meeting room and she had to maneuver through more motionless samurai and twisty corridors to get to it. When she opened the door to her chambers, she walked inside and stopped in front of the giant window on the opposite side of the room. She took a moment to stare out upon the white landscape through her glass portal. Downy flakes started to fall before her eyes and settle against the crystal window. The dark, quiet night had come and the gentle snow with it. For a soft second, Kurotsuchi noticed a break in the clouds and the pale light of a single, cold star shone through. She smiled at the star's beauty before it was once again enveloped by the clouds. Kurotsuchi wondered what Naruto was thinking at that moment and what environment he was presently located. Whenever she thought of the blonde, her thoughts turned to colorful images of emotion and memory. She painted these images on the stark canvas the current, snowy landscape presented to her and she marveled at the beautiful picture she created. Kurotsuchi was fixated on the blonde and she was sure it correlated with the loneliness in her heart. Loneliness was not an exclusive feeling, thus she knew she was not special for having it, but she still pondered the elements of it. Loneliness was not the only emotion she mulled over, she also wondered about love. If what she felt for Naruto was love, then was merely asking him about it the right course of action? She was not the first woman to ask such a question, she was aware of that much, but it was still difficult to answer. After thinking about it when she rested her head on her pillow for a few moments, she concluded it was probably difficult for a reason and she should worry about it later. On that note, she decided to drift away and rest her weary body. As the snow traveled its weighty course outside the window and Kurotsuchi closed her alluring eyes, she hoped a certain smile would appear again in her dreams. The desert wind did not bring the cool air Naruto desperately craved. Instead, it brought more unwelcome heat and he realized why the summers of Kaze no Kuni were considered extremely dangerous. If it was not for Isabu's chakra constantly creating water for him and circulating the same chakra through Naruto's body, then he would have been dehydrated long ago. Even though it was setting in the horizon, the sun still burned savagely on his hooded figure as he stepped through the yellow sand dunes. He had been traveling through the desert sands for 3 days already and he knew he would probably reach Sunagakure later that evening. He had initially thought of moving during the night and sleeping through the days, but because of Isabu's chakra and the fact that there were more hours in the day during this time of year, he had decided against it. He also wanted to reach Suna as soon as possible. Despite the grueling heat, Naruto still relished the current beauty surrounding him. His warm smile accentuated his ocean blue eyes as they observed the golden sunset ahead of him with the feeling of the smooth texture of the sand in the exposed openings of his sandals. Naruto had been marching along the major trade route between Ame and Suna, so he would occasionally pass by fellow travelers, merchants, and caravans daily. Naruto had noticed fairly quickly that none of these people traveled alone due to the heat. Because of this, most of the other migrants either exchanged shocked glances in his direction or directly questioned him. The latter method usually resulted in awkward answers or unwanted attention from his revealed identity. The thought of seeing the Kage drove him to take one step after another and made him ignore the excessive heat. Naruto had endured years of rigorous training, but journeying through the sinking sands and the intense heat of the desert greatly humbled him. While the trek was arduous, it was by no means the most onerous activity Naruto had ever undertaken. His conclusion was it would be considered unwise to underestimate the elements, regardless of his vast strength. He wondered how Gaara did it. Naruto smiled at the thought of his great friend. It had been a couple years since he last saw the redhead due to the busy schedule of being a Kage. Gaara had always been there for him in the past and he was anxious to see him again. Gaara frequently told Naruto he had saved the redhead from his own demise and he was his first true friend. Naruto would tell him he did nothing out of the ordinary, which was a true statement. Gaara always liked that answer. Despite Naruto's excitement to see his old friend, there had been another figure on Naruto's mind of late. Naruto's thoughts the past few days lingered affectionately on the kunoichi he had encountered. He yearned for her smile, her eyes, her tone, her very presence. He enjoyed the fiery spirit she had within her and he wanted to stir the fire more. Her rosy eyes and pale skin caressed his dreams and kissed his soul when he laid down in the soft, Enki sand. Naruto was no fool. He knew why he thought these ideas and he wanted them to grow. He wanted his hope to move and strengthen with every whisper of sentiment he added. He needed to see her again and broaden his illustration of what he felt about Kurotsuchi. Patience was a virtue Naruto had acquired over the last few years, but it certainly did not come naturally to the hero. Virtues were premonitions that Naruto was currently learning because he knew a great leader was built by them. But the fibers and inner workings of his mind were being twisted and pulled by this woman. He constantly restrained himself from bringing Kurama out and racing for Tetsu no Kuni with all haste. Whenever Naruto felt impatient, he pondered what Shikamaru once told him a couple years back when they were playing an evening match of shogi. Don't let your wants control your needs, the spiky-haired Jonin had told him after Naruto had made a brash, yet foolish move. Naruto did not need to see Kurotsuchi at this given moment and he kept repeating that fact over and over in his mind until he was supposed to believe it. So far, he was having a hard time convincing himself. The half-moon's silvery glow peeked out of the north dunes after the sun's brilliance receded into the west. The hot desert cooled exponentially and the breeze drifting over the sandy hills was finally refreshing. The stars began to appear and their pale light resembled snowflakes upon a black canvas. Naruto looked up and admired the beauty of nature's vivid painting as he slowly roamed towards his destination. He pondered on the vastness of the universe above him. Naruto knew he was one of the strongest men alive, but the greatness of the stars reminded him of his insignificance. He was small, but he had changed other lives during his time on the earth and that held significance, he told himself. If anything, however, the stars humbled the war hero. Naruto was so enraptured by the stars and his thoughts of existence that he did not notice the dark, rocky walls of Suna in the distance when they first came into view. It was only after a few more minutes, until he tilted his head down and saw the familiar landmark. When Naruto drew closer to the cliffs and the cleft that served as the entrance to the hidden village was visible, he sensed a Sunanin watching him from a nearby hillock. Naruto stopped in his tracks and unveiled his hood. The shinobi broadened his eyes in surprise because of his initial thought of himself being carefully concealed. The shock continued when the realization of the person standing before him was the war hero, Naruto Uzumaki. The shinobi guard stood up nervously and marched towards Naruto with a rigid posture. Naruto stood in place and attempted to reveal no malcontent in his features. The shinobi immediately performed a bow to Naruto when he was close enough. Naruto nodded and smiled gently at the disciplined guard. Naruto did not really enjoy civilities or manners, but he understood the significance of them. The glow from the moon in the distance illuminated the shinobi's features and Naruto did not need to squint to notice them. The man appeared to be nervous standing before him and he had issues looking Naruto in the eye. The man shifted his feet and stammered in his speech when he addressed the war hero. "Welcome, Uzumaki-san. Forgive me, I was not informed you were visiting, otherwise I would have called Gaara-sama." Naruto shook his head and brought up his hand to demonstrate his placid manner on the subject. "Please, there is nothing to forgive. If you'll allow me to enter the village, I will meet with the Kage promptly." The Sunanin gulped and gave a face that portrayed his realization of the ignorance he had revealed. He then stepped aside and gestured towards the cleft in the high, rocky walls, which was the only entrance and exit to the village. The man offered to escort him, but Naruto said he knew the way, and with that, he stepped into the sand and ventured into the cleft. The narrow passageway between the steep cliffs ran straight through and created a sense of dark safety around those who passed within its natural walls. Naruto traveled through the cleft steadily and uneventfully. Naruto noticed that as he was crossing through there were silent sentinels on top of the cliffs staring down at him. They must have been notified of his presence by the Sunanin from earlier, because they did nothing but gaze at him as he strolled through. When Naruto reached the other side of the cleft, he surveyed the large village before him. Sunagakure was entirely situated within a fortified valley surrounded by the large cliffs that Naruto had seen from afar. Unlike Konoha, Suna was a centralized village with the Kage office building lying in the exact center of the urban area. An arrangement of open paths and roads aligning in a circle at various degrees each led directly to the spherical-shaped Kage office building. Naruto knew that was where his old friend was probably located, so he made his way down the main path that connected the cleft to the center of the village. During the summer, most of the village's inhabitants did not venture out into the streets until the cool evening began. The village was bustling, filled with lights and citizens as Naruto made his way to the office building. Naruto tried to lower his hood so he did not cause an upheaval, but the word must have broken out that the famous war hero, Naruto Uzumaki, was visiting Suna to see the Kage because it was not long before Naruto was surrounded by a massive entourage of onlookers and fans. The crowd surrounding Naruto grew significantly within a short amount of time. People were yelling, shouting, and cheering at the young blonde as he quickly discarded his now useless hood and waved at his admirers. Many of these people were shinobi that had fought alongside Naruto 4 years ago, and he remembered all of them. He thanked them all gracefully and they all responded with great earnest at his humility. With the whole village realizing Naruto was visiting, he surmised he was not going to see Gaara anytime soon. Fortunately, the redhead had decided to intervene. After a few minutes of handshakes, congratulatory messages, claps, grins, and sheepish neck rubs, a huge rift started to form through the large crowd. People squirmed and gathered in alarm at the slow progression of shifting sand. At first glance, it appeared the sandy path was splitting down the middle, but once Naruto saw a familiar face shine at the end of the rift, the hero knew what was happening. Gaara had used his sand to separate the crowd so he could reach Naruto. He had been careful at using his chakra so he did not hurt any of the bystanders with the creation of the path. When the citizens of Suna realized it was their Kage responsible for the rift, they regained their composure and became silent. As Gaara strolled to him, Naruto could not help but give his old friend a dazzling grin that brought about a childlike appearance. The usually stoic Gaara smiled softly at Naruto when they were within an arm's reach of each other. Naruto took in his friend's older self. Gaara had shortened his hair since they last met and combed it neatly to the side to reveal his tattoo of the kanji meaning love, giving the redhead a professional, sophisticated look. While Naruto appeared more earthy and rugged in his youth, Gaara had cleaned himself up. Naruto thought the style suited his friend nicely. Gaara motioned and addressed his subordinates and citizens with a calm wave. Uzumaki-san will have plenty of time to meet with all of you tomorrow, Gaara declared with a dignified voice. Please allow him to rest and go back to your business, everyone. There was a great murmur of disappointment as the onlookers reluctantly obeyed their leader and returned to their matters. Naruto nodded his thanks to Gaara as the Kage motioned for him to follow him to his office. As the duo walked side by side along the sandy path, Naruto glanced at his friend and smiled gratefully. You're always getting me out of trouble. The blonde's light joke sounded refreshing in the moonlit night. Gaara remained stoic in his response, but his tone carried an edge of liveliness. Which is probably why you're not Hokage yet. Gaara's stoic expression was replaced by a light-hearted smile when Naruto laughed heartily at his jab. When the pair reached the office building, they passed two perplexed Sunanin standing guard at the entrance and climbed up to the upper levels of the construction. They arrived at Gaara's office and entered through the heavy, wooden doors leading into the room. Sitting at the far end of Gaara's desk was a young woman with short, brown hair and kind, reflecting eyes. She was quite pretty, wearing a short, pencil skirt that accentuated her feminine frame. Naruto remembered her from when he had rescued Gaara from the Akatsuki and waved politely in her direction. The woman nodded in amiable fashion and stood up from her seat. She strutted over to Gaara and bowed respectfully to him. Naruto also noticed a slight glint in her eyes when she bowed. It was not one of professionalism. A myriad of thoughts rushed through his mind as he deciphered the meaning of that glint. The woman gave a cordial smile and fastened her eyes upon Gaara's. I finished and edited that report for you, Gaara-sama. Is there anything else I can do for you? Gaara also carried a professional and composed demeanor when he replied to her. Naruto could not help but think it was a tad forced. No, thank you. You are free to leave for the night, Matsuri. The woman bowed one last time before leaving the room. As she was retreating, Naruto noted the delicate way her hips swayed and the quick glance Gaara took to notice it as well. Once she was gone and the doors were securely closed, Naruto flashed his friend an astute grin. He had figured out the meaning. She seems nice, Naruto observed, implication dripping from his voice. For a careful second, Naruto saw a quick flush of heat rush into Gaara's face and the Kazekage promptly cleared his throat. Matsuri is a very capable assistant and I greatly admire her rectitude, Naruto-san. Naruto could only wonder what the vivacious brunette was capable of and kept his grin fixed. I'm sure you do, Gaara. Naruto tilted his head gently and creased his brow by a small margin. Also, you know I hate formalities between friends. Gaara smiled sincerely at his friend. They both had been through a great series of chaotic and exorbitant events and they had loved every second of it because they knew it had all changed them for the better. Gaara did not have to reserve or quell himself in front of Naruto and there were very few people on the earth that could do that to the redhead. Gaara was able to become the Kazekage because of the truth Naruto had declared to him during the Chunin exams all those years ago. Gaara was able to become his true self around Naruto because that was always what Naruto was, his true self. That admirable quality was what drew people to the blonde and was the reason why the 5 great shinobi countries had worked together during the war. All of the Kage respected and admired Gaara for his integrity and character, but Gaara would not have been that way without Naruto. In Gaara's eyes, he owed the blonde hero everything, but he knew Naruto would hate it if he felt like he was owed something. Gaara loved his friend and would stand with him through anything. He knew Naruto felt the same and that was all he could ever ask for. Gaara moved behind his desk that was ordained with the kanji for wind and sat down in his seat. Very well, Gaara agreed. Now, Kakashi informed me of your mission a month or 2 ago and I'm glad to say that you're welcome to stay here in Suna for as long as you like. Naruto smiled and sat down in a guest chair directly across from the Kazekage's desk. Fantastic, I could use some relaxation. We should also do some training while I'm here. Or maybe even a spar. Naruto brightened at the possibility of sparring with his powerful friend. Gaara smiled but then frowned gently at the proposition. I can't. I'm afraid Suna is currently having major issues with bandits at a nearby oasis. Naruto's expression turned solemn at the Kazekage's explanation. I've sent numerous teams of elite shinobi, but only few have returned with grisly reports. It seems these are not mere bandits. Kankuro and Temari have been extremely busy with other missions, so I can't call on them. Naruto could see the stress and frustration behind Gaara's dark-rimmed eyes. I'm almost at the point of going myself, but I don't want to leave the village unguarded. Naruto stared in deep contemplation at what Gaara was saying and knew his friend would never directly ask him to do anything. Gaara was not even implying that Naruto should do something, the leader was only being vulnerable with him. But he would never sit aside when his friends needed help. After a short pause, Naruto said this, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? Gaara sighed and nodded reflectively. At least wait until tomorrow, okay? His tone almost had an edge of desperation laced within it. Naruto chuckled and agreed. They discussed terms and whether Naruto should go with a team or not to eliminate the threat. Gaara knew what Naruto was capable of, but he still did not want to take any chances. Naruto insisted he could take care of it himself. In the end, they compromised on him bringing along one elite shinobi. After that, the pair of skilled fighters conversed about what had been going on in their lives. They talked about what had happened since they last met, about memories of old adventures, and their goals for the future. At one point, Gaara inquired about Naruto's relationship status. This was something that Naruto would have normally brushed aside and moved on to more fruitful conversation, but this time he was not so sure. Naruto's recent feelings for Kurotsuchi gave him pause and prevented him from giving his usual response. It was this pause that made Gaara genuinely curious and made him lean forward in his chair in slight bewilderment. Naruto was not known for having romantic feelings for people. Of course he was capable of romance, but he was not regarded for it by his own admission. Gaara repeated a question he had asked earlier, "Are you seeing anybody, Naruto?" This time, Naruto looked straight into Gaara's eyes with resolve and answered, "No," but Naruto paused again and realized he had to tell somebody and Gaara was beyond trustworthy, so he decided to admit it. It could only benefit him, he surmised. "I am interested in someone. Actually, more than just interested." Naruto had a puzzled but assured expression when he had announced that. Gaara leaned back and gazed at his friend pensively. Who? By nature, Gaara was not a nosy person, but he would be lying if he said he was not curious about his best friend's life. Naruto knew Gaara was not trying to pry and only asked because he was willing to help him with his predicament. "Kurotsuchi, Onaki's granddaughter," the blonde admitted. Gaara was not expecting that. The redhead was certainly not an expressive man, but he was unable to hide his surprise at Naruto's confession. Naruto did not seem perturbed by Gaara's shock and only waited patiently for his response. Gaara's awe evaporated quickly and turned into relaxed excitement. "I see. She's the current Iwa representative for the Union, so I'm not surprised that you ran into her. However, I am curious." Naruto's long tresses shifted gently when he raised his eyebrows lightly. Gaara was not going to ask the usual question when faced with this scenario. He was not going to ask why. Instead, he wanted to jump ahead and ask a more practical question. "What are you going to do about it?" Naruto did not hide his surprise either as he thought of how to honestly answer the sudden question. Naruto was not sure what he should do. His feelings were real and his attitude was not clouded, so he knew he was not in the wrong. Naruto knew he was being honest with himself and he wanted to be with the captivating woman again so he could properly discern what to do. At this moment, Naruto knew he could not accurately answer Gaara's question, not yet. Although, Naruto did have part of the answer. "I'm going to see her again and find out her feelings on the matter," he finally confessed with careful accentuation. Gaara smiled in approval at the answer. "I look forward to hearing about it." It was a mature way of dealing with the situation and Gaara greatly endorsed it. With that, Gaara glanced at his clock and stood up from his chair. "In the meantime, we should both get some rest. It's late." Naruto nodded and he followed after Gaara. Naruto had stayed at the office building before so he knew he would be assigned the sumptuous chambers that bordered Gaara's. When they reached the room, Naruto marveled at the extravagance of the wonderful, oasis-themed bedroom he admired so much. The trimmings were gold and brown with panelings of vivid shades of blue and green. Flowers and other exotic flora also decorated the room. The large canopy bed Naruto relished was already prepared for and he quickly set down his belongings next to it. Gaara stood in the doorway and smiled at the easiness that seemed to settle on Naruto at seeing the beautiful place to rest. "Let me know if you need anything." "I'll see you in the morning," Gaara said as he closed the door once Naruto said good night. With Gaara gone, Naruto turned to gaze out the enormous window that looked out upon the village. The lights of Suna were still numerous and shined gleefully in the night. Thankfully, the artificial lights were not bright enough to outshine the brilliance of the stars above. Naruto reflected on those lights in the sky before he retired for the night. He wondered if the stars could tell him what Kurotsuchi felt about him. If they could speak, what would they say about the matter? Would they tell him he was wasting his time or that he should stop worrying so much? It was times like this where Naruto wished he had a father figure to ask for guidance. He realized Kakashi was probably the figure he was looking for. He eventually decided he would write out his report and ask Kakashi about the issue in the morning. Naruto yearned for Kurotsuchi and wanted greatly to see her rosy eyes once again. The stars brought him some comfort and he realized he needed to learn patience about such things. Still, he thought of her. As Naruto fell upon his comfy bed and wrapped the thin blankets around himself, he pondered the mystery of love and the dreams it would surely bring him. That's it for part 1. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.